Welcome to the CodePrep Podcast, the podcast that shows you how you can get into tech. Today's guest is Terri Chu. I'm excited to have Terri today because her path within tech shows the possibilities of moving from one area to another area, as well as having experience with a wide range of tech stacks. Lots of our listeners ask if they should specialize in one area or be a generalist in many areas. And Terri will be able to answer that question for our listeners today. So let's get started. Terri, can you tell our audience what is your current job in tech and what your daily life is like in that position?
Sure. Right now, I'm working as a backend developer at Airbus Aerial. We do mainly Java, and I do dabble in some DevOps work as part of that job, but my main focus is on development of anything related to not the visuals.
So yeah, did you decide early on that front end make it pretty development was not really your bag, or
No, for some reason, when I went to the boot camp, I decided to do Rails. I had seen some Ruby things and it sounded cool and it was really popular. So I chose that versus going the front end route. They didn't offer an Android class, and I was like, well, at least I can get the back end part of it. I had tried to do some database stuff myself before deciding to go to the boot camp, and I was like, I really don't understand how to even design what I need to do. So let me go get that part done, and then I'll figure the rest out like later.
So when you talk about doing a coding boot camp and looking at doing Ruby on Rails, doing the back end, your area of specialization that you work in is mainly on the back end area. Can you give any recommendations or advice for our audience on how to pick which area that people should focus on, whether it be the front end or should it be the back end, or God forbid if you want to do both? How do you find which one is the best for you, and what advice can you give to our audience that are looking at trying to decide?
So I think both front end and back end work really well for people that have like puzzles or like solving things, and so from that aspect, like either would work. I guess for the front end, it seems like those people tend to be a little bit more like not so much artsy, but they seem to have an easier time making stuff look pretty. I personally struggle with that. Like I can make stuff and I can make it work, but it takes me a lot longer to design stuff that I design myself that looks as nice as when someone that works on the front end does it. So if maybe you find that you like solving problems and making stuff pretty is not quite your game, back end might be a better position for you. I feel like personally, like code is beautiful. So for me, like that's the art piece. No one else sees it, but that's like how I get to express the art side of programming is through like beautiful code, not so much like the beautiful UI side.
I mean, I won't lie, the whole reason my VS Code has themes is because I think it's beautiful when my Jenkins files are all color coded.
Oh yeah, you got to find your beauty. So you find, I think, what works for you. I think if you are unsure, maybe try to take a few like free online classes in both and see which one maybe drives for you. I wouldn't recommend if you're just starting to try to do both. That's just my thing. I find it really hard to focus and learn when you're trying to spread your attention too thin. So if I'm trying to learn a new skill, I generally try to learn like that one new skill and not like 5 at once.
Yeah. Solid.
Yeah.
One of the areas that people ask about is, should I focus on one area, or is it okay once I get into tech to branch out into multiple areas? And I think that you've got some valuable advice that you can share with the audience, simply because you've got experience doing testing. You've got experience doing development. You've got experience working on the back end, whether it be Java or Ruby on Rails, and you've done a little bit with DevOps as a result of your back end experience. And you also have experience in doing Android development. What would you recommend to people? I mean, is it okay to know a whole bunch of stuff, or is it okay to learn something and then move on to something else, or should you stay, in one area? Or what recommendations would you have for people based on your experience?
I think for me, I like to be like more of a jack of all trades in terms of tend to have a lot of hobbies that I'm like mid-grade at. I don't always go, sometimes I'll obsess and go super deep on something, but over the years in programming and outside of programming, I like cook, I knit, I craft, I do electronic stuff, and I tend to switch. And my career seems like it's followed that pattern where I did Rails and I was like, hey, I'm kind of bored. I do Java and I'm like bored. I do Android. So for me, it works to keep myself interested. I get bored after a while. After 2 or 3 years of doing the same thing over and over again, I want that like nervous rush of not knowing what I'm doing. I want to learn. I feel like it makes me a better programmer to kind of like see another technology stack, because it may be a little bit different and help me be better at some of the other stuff I do. So I don't think it's bad to switch. For me, it works. I don't know if I'll ever want to be a senior developer in any language. I kind of like staying in the middle ground for right now, but we'll see if that changes. I'm not quite ready to switch out of Java just yet. So if you're looking to, I think, grow your knowledge, it's good to kind of spend a little bit of time in something like 1 or 2 years, and then kind of, if you want to move on to something else, it's totally okay. If you're going to try and get into like a senior or an architect role, senior role is probably better just to stay and get better and better and better at the same language. Beyond that, when you're trying to do architecture stuff, I honestly think it helps if you've seen more things. You have more experience to pull from. I've seen that in some of the senior developers that I've worked with. They just seem like they pull solutions out of thin air. And I know they don't. I know it's just they've seen so many different things that they're like, oh, okay, I can figure this out because they've seen it or they've seen a variation of it. So I think it's totally okay to kind of, once you get into tech, not at the beginning, but once you get in, if you want to kind of branch out, I think it's totally a good idea.
Yeah, so you talked about your vast hobbies, and you sort of flippantly threw out, oh, I do some electronic stuff, but you failed to mention that you like what your undergrad is in and how cool the stuff you do is. Let me just throw that out.
I have
So if you wouldn't
forgotten.
mind,
I have forgotten everything I learned at school. I have a computer engineering degree, so it's not like I just got into electronics, but I legit forgot almost all of it. I did teach myself how to knit. I have forgotten how to crochet. I know how to sew, but I learned that as a younger person. So yeah, the electronic stuff is like, I kind of know some of it, but I did do a talk on it, and I'm not gonna lie, I had to go back and look up how all the circuitry stuff was so I could put it into my talk because I forgot.
Albert
So
Einstein argued that it's better not to memorize things. Your brain has limited compute power, so it's
yeah,
better to familiarize and forget and then relook up. So really, you're just Einstein level bright at that point. That's really
okay.
what I'm hearing. But
And I will tell
if
you,
you
I
wouldn't
am a budding chef, but I could not cook for crap out of college. Like I remember my best meal was like pasta and spaghetti sauce. Dump it in a pan, good to go. Um,
mind,
I've grown a lot since then. So yeah, some of the
woo.
hobbies have come from earlier years. Some of them you've been developing and getting better here and
Um, so the question that comes out of discussing earlier years in college is, what was your path? I love hearing how people got from, let's just say, grade school age or whatever, but
there. Yeah,
early education, to where they are now. So you did get a traditional undergraduate,
did.
um,
Which I did
but
not
what has been your
do.
educational path? to where you are now?
Yeah, luckily in my elementary school, they still had gifted programs where they would like put people that seemed like they were like good at math or something, science, in like more advanced classes. So I did those and I got exposed to programming. I remember doing programming in elementary school and I took typing classes. I was really fortunate to be at a public school that had that program. Um, my family is not technological at all. My mother works in the healthcare field. She's pretty okay at using her phone sometimes. She is not a programmer. We didn't really have, I begged for like our first computer. I think I traded like all my Christmas presents and a birthday present so I could try to get the first computer we got. I still didn't do any, I think I just made a decision to go for a computer engineering degree because it sounded cool. I didn't really do any research into like what that meant. Um, I don't know. I tend to do stuff like that. I haven't changed very much. Um, so I went to Georgia Tech and got a computer engineering degree. It was extremely difficult. I decided halfway through that I didn't really like the electrical engineering side that much, and then I didn't want to work in that field. But then I looked at how much money I owed and was like, well, you just need to finish this damn degree and you can figure it out later. Because it was a lot of money, and I was like, I can't stay here for another 2 years. It was too expensive. So I finished my degree, and then did not get a job in the engineering field at all. I don't even know if I applied for any jobs. I had like a testing internship that I had gotten. I had already decided that I didn't like testing, and I never wanted to work in testing. I was like, QA is horrible. I'm not doing this. So I got a job in QA after college. And ended up staying in QA for like 13 years. I'm not really quite sure why I stayed for so long, but I was traveling a lot, and that was fun when I was younger. And I worked as a consultant, so like that boredom thing that I get after like 2 or 3 years, I usually get bored. The traveling and the different jobs, the different projects that helped because I was never somewhere for like that long. Yeah, I ended up staying in that for a long time, and then I got really fed up with just I don't want to say it was a midlife crisis, but I was like, I want to make Android apps. How do I do that? I had no idea. And I started just looking around and found like there's boot camps that teach you how to do programming because I found that switching out of QA into dev is like unheard of. People don't do it. People don't think you can do it. When you tell them that you worked in QA, they immediately like dismiss the fact that you could even be a programmer. So I was like, no, I want to do this. So I talked to my husband and we decided it was okay for me to quit my job at that point to try to focus on the boot camp. That worked out, pretty well. It took a little bit longer than I expected, the time that I had to not be working. But I got my first job at a startup after that, and it's kind of been a like kind of not whirlwind from there, but like once you're in your first job, like you're good. You can kind of have a little bit easier time moving around. So I think that's like my start to finish story.
Well, it's always good to let the audience know that it's possible that if you start off in one area, it's perfectly acceptable to move into
Yes.
another area.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were in QA and you want to move into something else, like doing Android development, that is perfectly acceptable way of doing that. And one of the things that I have seen your work firsthand, and I'm completely in awe with what you've done from the Android side is we in Atlanta had a conference called We Rise, and it was a tech conference, and it had this year almost 600 people attending it, and the second year that the conference was in existence. You worked on the team that created an app that was used for that conference. And you did, I assume, the Android side of the development for the app, and it was an amazing app. And combining that with, we're recording this episode in November. It won't be going live until December, but October was Hacktoberfest, where people tell you to go out and start contributing, and that's one way of getting some experience to get into tech. You took that to a little bit different extreme, where you actually took your skill sets and used that for good for the app for this. What advice would you have for the audience that, if they want to move into something, or if they want to learn like a new tech, like Android development, and they're in a different environment, being able to use what you've learned in a skill set like this, where you're creating an app for an organization or creating an app for yourself that can help them to progress into learning something new?
Um, so for the Android stuff, like I've been actively pursuing learning that outside of work, in any free way that I can find. Um, I ended up getting into like an after work boot camp that didn't cost anything. It was called CodePath, but I had to apply and then I had to interview to get in. But I mean, I had never done Java professionally at that point. I'd only done Rails. They were slightly hesitant to let me in because of that. Um, and I had not really had any mobile development experience aside from doing like some tutorials and stuff, which are good to start, but it's really hard for me to get like full apps out of just the tutorial stuff. I needed more. Um, but I was really passionate, and so I think that helped because I was like, I'm still very interested in Android. I was actually doing some Kotlin training before we got on the call today. um, so like finding free things to do and being able to sit yourself down to study or to learn or to work on things, I think is really important. Um, Getting in the habit of doing that helped me set aside the time to make the app for the We Rise conference, because I normally am awake by myself on the weekends in the morning because my husband likes to sleep in and I sometimes let him. Um, So that's the time that I try to set aside to do like my personal learning, because it's nice and quiet and I have, a good 2 hour block of time where I don't have anything else to do. So setting aside that time, finding free resources, um, having a project that you're interested in. I know that most of the time when you're learning this stuff, people make like to-do apps or what's the other one? Blogs or something like that, where you can, I think that's good for the first project, but like when you're really trying to learn something, you kind of want to make something to show off that you can either use yourself or that you think is like solving a problem for someone else. And for us, I have been to quite a few tech conferences, and either none of them have apps or they have them and they're terrible. So for us, we were like, we really think We Rise could be put on the map more if they had a cool app that was really functional for people, because we wanted to help like lift the conference up. We want, and we were like, this would be a great project for us to do. We had a really awesome mentor, Alicia Carr, who like kind of gathered all of us together because we didn't know each other before the project. And she was the one that gathered the group, kind of got us started, and then kind of like pushed us off the ledge to get the project done. So huge thank you to her for knowing all the people to grab us together. But once we started, we set a date for when we wanted to be done, and then kind of self-drove ourselves through the project. That part was actually the hardest because I'm like a super procrastinator. And as the date came up closer and closer, I was like, we have to finish this thing. And I was like, at the beginning of the project, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get this done. Like, maybe, I hope we do. I mean, if we don't, like, it's not like there would have been an embarrassment if we didn't get it done and release it. So, I don't know. Like, for me, I have sometimes I don't finish projects. It's like everyone has that. You have that repo that you start and touch. But there was something about this one that like, I'm like, no, we have to finish this. We have to put it out. At all the hours we worked on it, like we had to get it done. So, I think finding a good project and then somehow giving yourself like a date and a goal and maybe some consequences can help you get through that learning hump, because, I procrastinate too, just like everybody else.
No, that's actually a really great idea. Especially, we talk a lot about boot camp versus self-teaching, and I think that setting goals and deadlines and maybe even consequences is a great way to stay on target when you're trying to self-motivate. So we try to ask all of our guests for a recommendation for anything in the world that you feel like makes your life easier or makes the world a better place or something that you just wish you'd known about years ago. So we would love to hear your recommendation.
For making my life easier as a developer or just in general, I guess it could be in general.
Yeah, say we don't limit.
I don't know if this makes my life easier, but like I gotta get in a better habit about this for some of my other self-training, because like I told you, I'm crazy. I have a lot of hobbies. I'm trying to like learn Mandarin, and I've kind of been wishy-washy about it. Like having my calendar be my source of truth for like a lot of where I plan my time. It seems crazy, but for me, it works well if I like block things off and say, okay, this is when I'm going to be working on this, because it kind of, and I know that there are times like Valerie and I have some time set up at work to study, and I haven't gone yet, but I was planning on going on Tuesday because it's on my calendar to study for our drone license test. But having that stuff, it like makes me feel guilty if I don't do it. It's kind of like that like goal setting where there's consequences, because I'm like, oh, it's on my calendar, like I'm supposed to be doing it. So if you're having trouble actually setting aside a time, like try put it on your calendar. You get the little reminder 15 minutes and you'll be like, oh yeah, I should sit down and do that. I think it does help, because, and then, there's that like setting your patterns. Like I have a pattern set where I usually work on programming in the morning on weekends. I wasn't like that always, but it's kind of like become a thing I've done so many times. I'm kind of like, oh, kind of bored. Okay, I guess I'll pull my laptop out and work on some programming. So yeah, my calendar is like, it's kind of, I don't always use self-teaching great, but that's like my consequence thing that I try to help myself out by putting stuff on there.
Fantastic.
Perfect. So the last question that we want to ask you is for a second recommendation. And you've talked about all the different areas that you've been into tech, being able to move, having different skill sets and so forth. For people that are going to get into tech, the last hurdle that they have before getting into tech is that, the coding interview, the interview process that they have to go through. So the last recommendation that we ask our audience after sharing how you've got into tech is, what recommendation can you share that will help them through the interview process? What can you recommend for them?
So for me, I used to be a lot more nervous trying to get up on the board in front of people. Even when I was in an interview, watching people do that, it would make me nervous for them, having to watch them go through that. And it tends to be something that I think some companies will do to have you like solve problems. And it can be really nerve-wracking to do that, especially when like pretty much all eyes are on you. I went and did like practicing in groups with other people. I think I went to a meetup where they did like interview practice where you grouped off in like 4 or 5 people and they gave each person a problem and said, okay, explain how you would solve this on the board. That was helpful in trying to like reduce my nerves, because it's like getting up on stage and performing. The more you do it, it gets supposedly easier, or it doesn't get easier, but you learn tricks to overcome, the anxiety that you have. But you'll never learn those if you don't practice it. So I would recommend, if you have to like, I don't know, sit your cat down and do it in front of your cat if you don't have anyone, but you should, find a meetup group, find a group of friends, even if they're not tech people, just to sit down and say, let me try to explain this to you. Because all of those interviews are trying to say, like, can you verbalize your thought process enough so that we understand how you solve problems? Not that you're solving them, but like, are you able to communicate with us? And practicing that will help I think, help you communicate better because you'll get a little bit more used to it and maybe helping you come down with some of the anxiety. Um, I mean, there's a ton of books out there that people recommend, and you can read all the books in the world. But for me, that getting up on the stage part is like the worst. So I think practicing that would definitely help, with anybody trying to interview.
Excellent. Great advice today on our episode with Terri Chu. You've shown us how you can go from a traditional computer science degree to getting into tech and then being able to transition from one area to another area and being able to have a wide range of skills and what value that has, and then basically how to prepare for getting past that interview process. So a lot of great information that you shared with our audience here today. So want to wrap it up. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise and your experience, today with our audience. And we will thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I really was excited. This is my first podcast I'm ever on, so thank you for inviting me on it.
Until next time, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.